Well, hey guys, happy Monday. I wasn't entirely planning on filming this video, but I'm anticipating it is much needed and expected for me. And I'm already getting a lot of questions about this, and that is, can I address some of the proposed reevaluation of sunscreen and sunscreen labeling that the FDA is making here in the States as far as our sunscreen. So that's what I'm going to do today. I'm going to address some of the proposed changes, some of the reevaluation. In the United States, sunscreens are treated as over-the-counter drugs, whereas in other countries they're treated as cosmetics. And what that means is that they are subject to a lot more scrutiny and regulation and oversight than the rest of the garbage that you buy in Sephora, for example. I say that jokingly, but you know, your serums, your moisturizers, all of those things that are intended as cosmetics, they aren't subject to the same degree of scrutiny and regulation as over-the-counter drugs. And so that is how in the United States the FDA views sunscreen. Currently, as it stands today, there are 16 ingredients that are approved by the FDA for inclusion in sunscreens and in sunscreens which are intended to be used to protect the skin from the damaging effects of ultraviolet radiation. Sunscreens are categorized into two categories sort of broadly. If you're not familiar with this, check out my sunscreen videos. I will list them down below. I have a whole series that talks about some of the common myths, misconceptions around sunscreens. So I will list those videos down below for your reference. But just to reiterate, sunscreens commonly are kind of thought of or referred to as physical sunscreens. Physical sunscreens are those that contain zinc and or titanium dioxide as the active ingredient, and these work by physically blocking ultraviolet light, whereas chemical sunscreens are any of the other ingredients, active ingredients. They include things like abbreviated, homosalate, octocrylene, octinoxate, oxybenzone, and these absorb ultraviolet radiation and then deflect it. So they function a little bit differently. And currently, the FDA has approved 16 ingredients, 2 of which are zinc and titanium dioxide, and then the remaining 14 are chemical filters. The reason sunscreens are important is they protect our skin from the damaging effects of ultraviolet radiation. Ultraviolet radiation is responsible for skin changes that lead to the formation of skin cancer. Skin cancer is the #1 cause of cancer in the United States. We are experiencing a huge burden of increasing incidences of skin cancer in this country, globally, worldwide. It's not just in the United States, but today's video with the legislation pertains specifically to the US. So this is a very, very topical issue, and that people need to be protecting their skin, and we're seeing the consequences of years and years of inadequate sun protection every day in dermatology clinics, with the burden of sun-related skin cancers that we see every single day. And that continues to grow with the aging population. And we continue to start seeing skin cancers forming in younger and younger people. So it is no longer just a disease of older adults. We're seeing it in younger and younger adults. There are 2 types of rays that come from the sun that we need to protect our skin from. There is UVB. UVB are the types of rays that are responsible for burning your skin, and they directly mutate the DNA in your skin cells and lead to cancer. UVA is the other type of UV that we need to concern ourselves with and protect ourselves from. UVA also contributes to the formation of skin cancers, and it also penetrates very deeply into the skin, damages the supporting framework of the skin, and compromises the skin barrier, compromises the integrity of the skin, and also is responsible for a lot of the cosmetic changes related to sun exposure, like wrinkles, sagging skin, and discoloration, what's known as photoaging. So we should be protecting our skin. We have to protect our skin from both UVB and UVA. It's very important. Now, in the United States today, if you go out and buy a sunscreen like this sunscreen by CeraVe, you will see that it tells you a value, the SPF. The SPF is a measurement of the ability of the sunscreen to protect you from a burn. So the SPF on our sunscreens really tells us how good of a job the sunscreen does at protecting us from UVB, the rays that burn. It gives us no information about UVA. On the flip side, if you go to countries in Europe or in countries in Asia, they have more scrutiny and regulation and stringency and requirement for labeling about the sunscreen's ability to protect you against UVA wavelengths. And the reason that's important is because when you go out and enjoy your day, you're not going to be cognizant of the damaging effects of UVA on your skin. There aren't really necessarily always going to be acute changes of UVA damage that you're going to appreciate that you have been exposed to. So, you know, when we get a sunburn, ow, we learn our lesson, ooh, I stayed out too long. But if you don't burn, your skin is still being damaged by those UVA rays that don't burn necessarily, but do all of these other things. So we have nothing on our sunscreens currently in the States that tells us anything about how well that sunscreen protects us against those damaging UVA. Now, thinking about the two types of sunscreens, we have physical, which is zinc titanium dioxide. Physical sunscreens do a very good job protecting against both UVB rays and UVA rays. They protect a very broad spectrum of damaging effects of ultraviolet radiation. So physical sunscreens are actually very, very good choices to protect your skin from the damaging effects of ultraviolet radiation. They do reliably provide coverage against UVA. How well each individual sunscreen does, I can never tell you here in the States because we don't have a measurement of the UVA protective ability of sunscreens. But we do know very confidently that both zinc and titanium dioxide are fantastic sunscreen ingredients for protecting against both of these wavelengths. When we get into the chemical sunscreens, however, they differ. In the United States, we actually only have 2 chemical filters that will protect us against UVA that are approved. We have abbreviated and we have Mexeril, also known as a Camsil. And I would say 99.5% of all sunscreens that you buy in the store that are chemical sunscreens are going to have abbreviated as the UVA ingredient if you're buying chemical sunscreens. Mexeril is owned by L'Oreal, is a filter owned by L'Oreal. You can only buy it here in the States. Only a few sunscreens, only one sunscreen actually that I'm aware of you can actually purchase, and it's very expensive. It's by La Roche-Posay. So I will list that down below for you guys, but it's very, very expensive. So that is the only other UVA filter that we have. So that is the only ingredient that we have in chemical sunscreens that protects us from those deep rays that we don't even really appreciate until it's too late. And the problem with abbreviated is that it's not very stable. So after you put it on the skin and you go out, it starts to degrade, it starts to decline in its ability to protect you against those damaging rays that you aren't even cognizant of necessarily. And to remind you guys, these UVA rays are those that come through glass, they come through clouds, and so even when it's gray out, even when it's cloudy out, even when the UV index is low, UVA is still a problem and still an issue and still something that you need to protect your skin from. Because abbreviated is so unstable, sunscreen manufacturers have come up with sophisticated technologies to stabilize abbreviated and make it a little bit more reliable. And one such way they do that is to complex it with Oxybenzone. So first up, as far as the FDA, they want to reevaluate 12 of the 16 ingredients that are approved for safety. They want to reevaluate them for safety and efficacy. So what's called as generally regarded as safe and effective. Currently, they view zinc and titanium dioxide, those being the 2 ingredients in physical sunscreens, they view those as generally regarded as safe and effective. But in recent years, there has been a lot of hype and fear-mongering around all of the other ingredients, around all of the chemical ingredients, oxybenzone, all of the non-zinc titanium ingredients specifically. there's been a lot of fear-mongering, frankly, around these ingredients. And I say fear-mongering because these are ingredients that have been in existence in our sunscreens for years, not only here in the States, but in other countries as well, with no evidence of harm to human health. And what has happened is that lobbying groups like the Environmental Working Group takes small animal studies and attempts to extrapolate that onto humans to fearmonger and promote political or financial interests. This is unfortunate and has led to a lot of false fears around chemical sunscreens. But the FDA wants to take another look. It's really interesting because in Europe, where Europe actually is generally a lot stricter about stuff that goes into over-the-counter products, but they are far more lenient than the United States with sunscreen ingredients. So they are more lenient in that regards, whereas we are more lenient with cosmetic ingredients like hydroquinone, for example, is legal here, and it is banned in Europe. So we're stricter with sunscreens here. But anyways, they want to reevaluate them, and I suppose that's not terrible. But what this is going to do is they're calling to action that manufacturers submit to them any evidence that they might have, any safety studies about all of these different other filters. So they're just reevaluating them, and it's not necessarily a bad thing that they're doing that. You know, if anything, maybe they can come back with some statements that help consumers feel more comfortable using these ingredients. That is what I'm hopeful for. But I wanted to make this video and tell you guys about this because this first step, I think, can get really misrepresented in the media. And, you know, I see a lot of headlines and a lot of titles. FDA is reevaluating how safe our sunscreens are. And it's like, calm down. It's not like they're just, you know, questioning the safety and efficacy. They're asking for manufacturers, they're asking for companies to submit whatever studies they have, whatever data they have on the safety of their ingredients. So it's a little bit different than the tone that these articles, these blog posts, etc. promote. There are some other fantastic things that the FDA is actually moving towards as far as our sunscreens go. The one thing that they're hoping to do away with, or you know, they're talking about doing away with, and I'm hoping they are, is to do away with combination sunscreen and insect repellents. I have a whole video on insect repellents, and in that video I talk about the issue around about products that combine insect repellent and sunscreen. It's not very safe. Basically, combination insect repellent sunscreens can compromise the efficacy of the sunscreen. Not only that, they are dangerous because you need to reapply sunscreen every 2 hours. You don't need to reapply, nor should you reapply insect repellent every 2 hours. So they are a safety concern as far as how you're supposed to reapply them. So the FDA actually wants to do away with those, which I fully support. I think that's fantastic. Next, they want to make another fundamental change, which I think can really be helpful to consumers. Currently, they cap the allowable SPF of 50. And the reason they cap it at 50, so sunscreen manufacturers aren't allowed to technically put things higher than 50. And the reason this came about is that we know that higher is not necessarily better as far as its ability to protect you from a burn. But what we also know is that consumers don't put on enough sunscreen. So, given that consumers don't put on enough sunscreen, meaning they don't ever put on, you guys see how much sunscreen I put on and you're always shocked by that. That's how much sunscreen you have to put on in order to achieve the SPF on the label. So for me, when I put on an SPF 30 sunscreen, you can see I buzzed through this particular bottle of CeraVe sunscreen in like 2 or 3 days, because in order to get to the SPF on this label, in order to get to an SPF 30, you have to apply it pretty thick and pretty dense. So having sunscreens that have a higher SPF actually compensates for your inadequate application. So I think that's a great change potentially as well. And then The other fantastic change that I'm really excited about is that they're talking about and mentioning that they're going to impose new regulation on testing to include more transparent UVA testing to be as rigorous as what they have in Europe and what they have in other countries. So that's phenomenal. If that comes to fruition, which I'm hopeful it does, then what that means is that consumers will know more about how good their sunscreen is, as far as not only the sunscreen's ability to protect them against a burn by finding the SPF number, but also how good the sunscreen's ability is to protect them against the damaging effects of UVA, which in some countries they use the PPD testing. So by and large, I actually think that some of these, some of these moves on behalf of the FDA are actually going to be very good. I wanted to make this video because, like I said, the media takes things like this and they make these big flashy headlines that I think just drive further fear-mongering about ingredients in sunscreens that we know are safe and effective. But some potential negatives that can come out of this and that can come out of this. If we look at the ingredient Oxybenzone, which is a filter in chemical sunscreens that I think is under a lot of scrutiny, particularly given the recent ban of these sunscreens in Hawaii as well as in Florida now. I made a video on that a while back in terms of the ban, so make sure you check that out. But Oxybenzone is a sunscreen ingredient that comes under a lot of scrutiny. We know it's safe for humans. There are studies showing that it potentially impacts the health of the coral reefs. However, there are a lot of things that impact the health of the coral reefs, so I'm not convinced that removing oxybenzone is necessarily going to be the step that is going to save the reefs. There are a lot of other things that are an issue with the coral reefs, and we really don't know that oxybenzone, you can't say oxybenzone is responsible for the dying out of the coral reefs and marine health. You really can't say that at all. There are so many people on this planet now than ever before. We're living longer, we're outstaying our welcome, and we're having our presence on this earth impacts the coral reef. Oxybenzone, eliminating it's not going to save the reef. The other problem is that oxybenzone can stabilize avobenzone, so it can make chemical sunscreens better as far as their UVA protection. It can make that avobenzone work a little bit better. So that's another potential issue if they choose to remove that. But here in the States, we really need more chemical sunscreen ingredients, and the FDA is really resistant to that. And it's rooted in a fixation with old legislation and rules that really don't make a lot of practical sense. And the problem with this is that it creates a lot of hurdles for cosmetic companies and manufacturers of sunscreens, creates many hurdles, and I fear that while sunscreens are great for people's health and it's good to make sunscreens, at the end of the day, companies are all about their bottom line. They have to make a profit, and if it becomes this expensive and if it becomes too expensive and arduous for sunscreen manufacturers like L'Oreal, for example, to meet the criteria and demands of the FDA, they're just going to stop making them, and we'll have fewer and fewer sunscreens to choose from. The other implication that this has on you is in terms of the sunscreens that might become available to you. Currently, zinc and titanium dioxide meet criteria for generally regarded as safe and effective, and they are safe and effective and fantastic ingredients in sunscreens. The issue with zinc titanium sunscreens, however, physical sunscreens, is that they leave an aesthetically displeasing white cast, which for people who have darker skin types, African Americans, Asian Americans, darker skin types, this is a really difficult and a barrier to compliance with sunscreen, understandably. But in the broad scheme of things, I'm actually very optimistic about many of these proposed changes, and I look forward to seeing the outcomes. I look forward to hopefully increased transparency in the labeling of sunscreens in the United States as far as their UVA protection, and I hope that we will now have further information to reassure the public of the safety of these chemical ingredients that we have used in sunscreens for years with no evidence of any harm to human health. These chemical filters, they offer something unique to sunscreens as over their physical counterparts, in that they allow for formulation of sunscreens that don't leave a white cast. Mineral sunscreens, those that contain zinc or titanium dioxide, they are fantastic sunscreens. They do a phenomenal and reliable job protecting against both UVB and UVA. But unfortunately, they leave a white cast, and they also don't feel great to a lot of people. They are thick, they're greasy oftentimes. People with acne complain that they make the acne feel oily or greasy and they don't care for it. For populations with darker skin types like African Americans, they leave a socially unacceptable white cast that nobody wants to comply with. And so chemical sunscreens get around that, and having more filters allows sunscreen manufacturers to formulate sunscreens that are easier to use and more cosmetically elegant, and that increases compliance. Sunscreens are only as good as the user is at putting them on and reapplying them. Sunscreens have to be reapplied every 2 hours while you're outdoors, or if you're not outdoors all day, at least 3 times a day. They wear off. And another potential benefit of this increased oversight that I forgot to mention is that the FDA also wants to have more regulation and oversight into the claims around sprays and powders and wipes. In many of my videos, you guys ask me, well, are sunscreens, powders, the mineral powders a good way to use sunscreens? How about the wipes, the sprays? I've told you in all my videos that I really can't answer that with much affirmation, because we really only have good regulation on sunscreen creams and lotions as far as how reliable they are, and the FDA is proposing to have some increased oversight into that as well. So that is another potential benefit that's going to come out of this. My motivation in making this video for you guys today is to hopefully buffer some of the headline fear-mongering that can occur. FDA, increasing scrutiny over chemical sunscreens. Are they safe? It's not quite like that. I think they're looking to build an argument, hopefully, that these ingredients are in fact safe. I really hope that in the future we can have those filters that are approved in Europe and Japan. I really hope that we can have them available here. They allow manufacturers to make more cosmetically acceptable sunscreens for people, and that's really a hurdle. Sunscreen is only as good as the user, and I think that's a real challenge for people. Most people don't do that. The majority of people don't do that. So for the majority of people, sunscreen is really not part of their everyday practice, which is unfortunate because it is an intervention to protect your skin from the damaging effects of ultraviolet radiation. But it's not the only one, and so sun protection is a multi-pronged approach that I will leave you with that. Sunscreen is not enough on its own. You can't just put sunscreen on and go about having a carefree day outside all day. You have to do more than that. You have to wear sun protective clothing, a broad brimmed hat, sun protective sleeves while you're outdoors, and you also have to avoid peak exposure, and you also have to limit your exposure outdoors. Don't stay outside for a prolonged period of time, particularly during peak sun exposure hours. It's not safe. I will list down below a link to the American Academy of Dermatology highlighting all of these recommendations. I'm not some rogue person in a tower that's making this stuff up. It is consensus recommendation that you need to be protecting your skin. And I show you guys in my vlogs and in my videos how I protect my skin from the sun and, how to do it. Wearing sunscreen, you see me putting it on, you see me reapplying it. I show you guys different types of sun protective clothing, and many of you really like that and are on board with that. So I hope this video was helpful to you guys. If you liked it, give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and as always, don't forget, sunscreen and subscribe. I'll talk to you guys tomorrow.